So us versus them. This is Switzerland. We are all after the same thing, building community. And everybody's doing it a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Yeah.
It's very different. It's a completely different approach.
Okay, save it
Yeah.
for the podcast. Like, we haven't started. I don't know we started
Look,
yet.
this is all day.
It is.
There's
We breathe it.
I don't run out
eat
of
it.
stuff to say about this tech stuff. So it is what it is.
Let's start by introducing. Okay.
For sure.
Are you ready?
Yes,
All
we
right,
are
let's do
ready.
it.
I feel like
Okay.
we've been rolling. Okay. All right, everyone. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Office Logic podcast. With me, I have Erick Gavin, Executive Director of Venture Miami, and Noel Jackson, who is the founder of Office Logic, also known as The Hub. We are kicking off the Lunch and Learn series, and for our next series, we are featuring Mr. Gavin and his journey. So, before I pass it over, the series is happening June 12th at 11 a.m. And Noel, can you share a little bit more about why the series even got started and what it is?
The reason for this series, the Lunch and Learn series, is because I want everyone in Miami to understand how Miami moves, what makes Miami move. And I'm trying to pick people that I believe are instrumental in getting Miami to where we want it to be. There's a lot of people saying that Miami is the next Silicon Valley or the next Wall Street.
I don't like that phrase.
The next Wall Street South. I think Miami is its own animal. I think Miami is amazing, and we're still getting there. We're not there yet. But for everyone to be able to jump on board, they need to know who makes Miami move, how does Miami move, how can we help, and what do we do together? This is all about building community, making it more cohesive, and making people like Erick more reachable. So I don't know. That's it.
No, I think that is a great segue into, showcasing Erick. And so we were talking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned that you do not come from a technical background. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I personally did not know that. And we have been in the same room for quite a while now.
Right.
And had several conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, can you share about your journey?
Sure. Let's start back with, so I'm originally from Chicago, and I moved down here for law school predominantly, but ended up starting at the University of Miami. And when I was at the University of Miami about 9 years ago now, I started with focusing on international law and trying to do things that were transactional across borders. As I was doing that work and talked to a bunch of my mentors, they said, "Hey, Erick, what trajectory are you going?" I'm like, "I'm going corporate. This is going to be great. I'm excited about it." And they're like, "No." All the stuff that you're doing, because at the time I was doing that contractual work and transaction work in the law school, but I really was focusing on something that was called the Startup Practicum and then the Launchpad at the University of Miami. And both of those had leanings towards entrepreneurship as it stood. And with those respective areas, I started saying like, "Oh, this is interesting, this is cool." And that's what I was talking to them about. So they're like, "No, this is not the direction you should be going. You should continue to pursue some of these things in this area if that's what you're interested in." And I met a woman, Leanne Buchanan, currently right now at Miami Data Innovation Authority. And when I met her, she had just been offered the role for director of Venture Cafe Miami. Venture Cafe is an organization, and they partner with their institution, which at the time, Cambridge Innovation Center, was on the edge of Wynwood. And when they started that whole process up, I was like, "Ooh, that sounds super interesting." So at a social, I said, "I want to intern here." And she was like, "I don't know. I don't necessarily need interns. I'm not necessarily sure." But I was like, "Please, this would be great. I would love to do this. First time ever." So for the second Venture Cafe ever, I ended up going there and serving people beer and wine, because it was free beer and wine for when you go to Venture Cafe. That's how we entice people to come. It's like, don't just come for education. Come for a drink.
Yeah.
just a small one. It's only a few. You can't have too much. And it wasn't hard liquor. It was just beer and wine. And when I was doing that, I met a lot of people. A lot of people. It started off with just like maybe 30 to 50 people a night. And then we started doing, numbers on it, and it was like 150, 300 people every Thursday, because it was every single Thursday we would be at this respective event. And as the Thursday kept getting bigger and bigger, and the education that was coming in, because at the time there were a couple areas that Miami leaned into. Like, people talk about health tech now. Health tech was actually still a thing back like 6-7 years ago when we were doing this whole process. And so they would hold sessions, and each one of these sessions would be about anywhere between 5 to 7 sessions a night. They would host them in these different size rooms. So it'd be 30 people in this room, 10 to 15 people in this room, bunch of different places. And as we were going through and learning those things, I would jump into a room every now and then, learn something, and then go out and serve some beer and wine again. And I would do this repeatedly over and over again. And I met everybody that, are really good friends with me now, like Claudia Duran, who's executive of director for Endeavor. I met her through that process, right? So I met a lot of people doing this week after week after week after week, in so many different ways. And I can't express how helpful that was, the consistency, which is why I talk to people about consistency now. Everything now is about how can we be more and more consistent in our approach to how we're doing networking, because sometimes somebody's not going to want to talk to you that night, right? And as wonderful as a person you are, as much as you have value to share, and as smart as you might be, the real important aspect of it is, have you been present in the room repeatedly? And can you, one night as opposed to another, for whatever reason, get in contact and reach out to this person in a way that might be more open on one night than another, right? And it helps. It helps to move things forward. So that's a bit of the start. Obviously, after Venture Cafe, I did a whole bunch of stuff after that, and then got into this role. But it all started a lot with that level of consistency of being present. And then I should mention, that's how I found out about boot camps, and I got into my first boot camp because someone at the Thursday gathering told me about scholarships at Ironhack, and I applied and got it, and then I went into that boot camp after I graduated. So it was really just being present and available, and keep telling people, this is what I want. I'm like, I really want to get into tech, and I'm trying to figure out how, and I've been doing all this stuff with the law and legal aspect of it, but I want to shift over, and I need to figure out exactly how to do that. And I was really able to do that because somebody just gave me a little note, like, you should look at for the scholarship, you should do this thing, you should do this thing. I did a whole bunch of things people told me, but I consistently kept taking those respective things in, and this one was a big one, and it lended me into getting into that boot camp, which got me into my first tech role, which then got me into the Center for Black Innovation, which then got me in contact with the mayor, which then the mayor got me in contact with where I'm at now, right? Wow. So like it steamrolls into itself, and you don't always make these quantum leaps, right? From my last role to this role, that was a huge leap. That was a quantum leap for me, both personally and then also professionally. But that only happened because I set this groundwork, about 5 years of groundwork of all these different community connections and reaching out to people and talking to people, being able to do that it got to that point.
I wanted to let you know how I met Erick.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the day that I met you.
Yeah.
And you came into my office, you sat down, and you said, how can I help you? No one had said that to me before, and I didn't even know how to answer. And talking about from a non-technical background, I came in, and I'm still non-technical, but the other day someone said to me, how do you know all of this? Because I was talking about different things. And I said, through osmosis. When I'm present, and I'm listening, and I'm trying to take in, and I'm trying to learn. And yes, I want to take courses. And yes, I want to sit in on all of the different programs that we're having here. They're not just teaching the founders that are here, they're teaching me at the same time. And but I have to say that, Erick, after meeting you and that how can I help you, I was just like, oh my goodness, someone asked me how can they help me, and you're genuine. You're, there are no pretenses. You just are a really good person. You're genuine, and that is so appreciated by me. And if you've helped me this way, I can't think of how many other people in our ecosystem that you have helped. And so I'm sure not just myself, but there are a lot of people out there that want to thank you for being so diligent, being just reachable. And for me, it seems that way anyway. And
Thank you.
thank you.
I mean, I appreciate that. I'm going to receive that. I have a hard time receiving stuff. I appreciate that and I receive that. And I will tell you that I'm only this way because people did that for me. Not all the time, not every time, but the things that are impactful and the opportunities people gave me, they matter.
Yes.
They change trajectory of my life. And I know that sometimes it is just a conversation and it is just a good word and it is just like a nice note. Sometimes it's those really small things that like steamroll or snowball into these moments where that changed who I am now. And that helped me get to where I really wanted to go. This thing I've been talking about for years now finally happened because somebody made the effort to actually respond to me or reach back out or tell me something, or just like I wanted a connection to just talk to this person and they just made that introduction for me. And sometimes it's those little small things that help to open up doors that you otherwise wouldn't have known. So if I'm able to give a good word, it's because someone has given a good word to me.
You're
and
paying
I
it
appreciate
back.
that. I want to pay that back.
Yeah, and
Tenfold, if
what
possible.
what you did for me, in my small way, I'm doing it for everybody that comes my way.
Absolutely.
And if the entire ecosystem operated the way that you did, before you know it, we will be the one ecosystem for the country, the place that everybody wants to be. But we're still growing it. We're young.
Yeah.
And people have to realize that this doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's you don't snap your fingers and it becomes what everybody thinks it's supposed to be. We're still growing it, but I believe we're growing it with the right people, and you're point one. You're one of the first people that I met. And again, I can't thank you enough for being open, honest, and just I follow you. You set such a great example, not just for me but for everyone. So you walk into a room and everybody's looking at you because we want to follow what you're doing.
Don't look at me.
Yes.
No,
you are that
no,
person.
no.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that. I do. I think one, there are a lot of I want to say there are a lot of people that are doing really, really great work. And one thing that I hope is as we continue to grow as an ecosystem more broadly, that we bring back to center, what are we hoping to accomplish like long term? And, one of my hopes for things long term is, yes, we're going to continue to build up a stronger, like when people come to Miami and they haven't, been here before, the first thing that I get, at least for me, from people is, I love how welcoming and open the ecosystem in the community is. Like I get that all the time. Yeah. And now the next kind of challenge for us is to take what that warmth and that feeling of sharing and community, and take that and build economic and financial value from it, right? So as we move forward, the question is going to become, how do I take this nice, beautiful, warm relationship that I've established and actually have economic value that I'm creating either through the business that I'm running or through the businesses and opportunities that are coming through my or my colleague's door at that same.
Yeah, and I want to touch a little bit on that because from also a non-technical background and perspective, I think I have learned to also move my way into this tech ecosystem. And you both, I don't think you guys know this, were a big part of that. For me, I was a little bit involved in tech through a previous company that I work with, but then really Built in Miami Summer was what did it for me. And that is how I landed here in Noel's space and never left. And Noel was also someone that was super monumental for my growth, because not only did she allow me to stay in this space but thrive in this place as well. A little bit after I met you, and same thing, you said, how can I help? And I also had no idea, and I was like, well, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm like, I don't know how you can help, but this is where I'm going, and what do you have? And you said, get in contact with this person. Have you considered this? I took that in, went back into my little cave, and really just started working, quietly. And it's gotten to the point where now I even come to you for other clients and other opportunities because I've got into that space. But this is all to say, a couple months back, I was writing a refresh article, and I asked you a question, and I said, what is next for us? We are making headlines already. Companies are moving out here. And you mentioned something along the lines, I think it's now time for the dust to settle a little bit and really people to find kind of like their place or how they really want to contribute to the ecosystem. And my question was that, I didn't ask that day, but now it's like, how can people even know where they fit in?
In a fast moving environment that feels like water, it's hard to understand, for my little puzzle piece, where does it go in this mosaic that is being built. The first thing you have to ask is, when we talk about community, it is one larger community, but there are sub communities within that community, right? And you both have experience building aspects of sub communities, specifically in this physical location, right? In the hub. When you are going and operating in your normal, either where you're building your company, whether you're working in a company or corporate, or you are doing aspects of services, where do you find yourself, gravitating towards, right? Like, some people do it on the lines of like what my position is. So I'm in sales, so I go where salespeople are at, right? And that's one way to do it. But the other part might be like, I'm in sales, but I see myself, at least in terms of how the sales that I do, as being a creative. And so how do I go about doing that in a way that actually, makes sense for me? And when people start to build that, that's where value will be given, because that's where their passion is at, right? So to ground it a little bit more, and I'll talk about myself, right? I am executive director for Venture Miami. That is my role, and my role and actions that I'm supposed to do are to help build the tech ecosystem, which look like, how do I close gaps that exist for talent and entrepreneurs, and then how do I help people that are moving here feel comfortable moving here, whether that's where they're going to live, where they're going to work, where their kids are going to school. Our team helps to facilitate that. But as a community member, where do I find my value, like, leaning into? And so one thing that I have done previous even to before this is stuff around data and stuff around data visualization, stuff around work that has to do with how we work with data more broadly before we get to AI being using it for training models and what have you, right? For large LLMs and things of that nature. With that part, I'm like, I want to lean back into that. So as people are starting new developer clubs and groups and cohorts and things of that nature, I'm like, that's what I want to do. I'm like, I love aspects of other things. Like, I love being able to talk about AI, but I don't really want to just focus on that. I want to focus on this stuff before we get there, because I know how important data going in is. So I want to find the group of people that care about that, because that's where I feel like my value not only is going to be added, but also where I feel like I'm going to find my place, at least as a technologist in that respect, right? And so you have to do a little bit of that searching based on your own skill set and based on where you find care in. I love data visualization because I see how light bulbs go off when we're actually visualizing information for people. Like, it's really, really impactful. When somebody puts together like a presentation, I know when somebody gets it when a certain type of chart goes up. It's like, oh, I understand now, right? And obviously there needs to be a story along with that, but that's a core part of how we talk about data, through stories. And so when I see those respective things, that pulls on my heartstrings, and I'm like, I want to go and work on stuff like that. And that's how we build community up more broadly. And so that's what people need to do, right? And it's to take it one more step beyond that. Then how do you leverage that in order to build businesses, right? And whether that's you being the technologist and or expert in order to help build a business in that particular area, or it's you saying, actually, the idea that I had around this particular skill set is helping me to build this new business. And doing that as an entrepreneur, how do I go about doing that? Because we're going to continue to build up resources. You don't need to worry about that unless that's a passion project for you to find out how to build better resources for founders. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
If you're trying to figure out how to get more funding in, don't then do a 180 and say, I need to help this as a founder issue now, unless it's a passion project for you, right? Or a passion point for you. Like, the lanes that we establish for ourselves, we need to be comfortable being in them. And then we grow beyond them as we continue to build our skill sets, our networks, and who we have. But a lot of problems that people have, at least at this early stages, everybody wants to be everything. And we have to sometimes rein it in a bit. Like, what are the particular lanes that we want to find ourselves in? So when we're talking about organizations, what does your organization do? If I say my organization deals with everything, I'm like, that's a lie.
Yeah.
I'm like, we don't educate people. I'm like, I can talk to people, and through that they can learn, but we are not educators in that respect, right? I teach, but I don't teach in this job function and role. That's not what we do. I also don't give funding to founders. And I make that very clear. Yes, the name Venture Miami is a misnomer. It's like, I don't actually fund, companies as they go along, but I want to help them find funding. And so I have to be clear to people, about what that is. And yes, you might say, Eric, that's what you have to do because you're in government, but everybody should do that. Everybody should be extremely, extremely clear about where they come in and add value, and then where areas like, hey, I know you're asking me to do that respective thing, but I don't do that. That's not an area that I do, because you'll end up spinning your wheels trying to figure out how you can add value in that area where that's not where you really add value in. And so as we continue to grow as a community, that's what's going to make these things clear, because then people will know what to come to you for. Say, oh, Eric's the person that does data visualization. I need to go to him for that. Or who does data visualization? And Noel will say, Eric does that, because Eric told me that he does that, not 10 different things. Eric doesn't do all data and AI and data management and systems architecture. He does one thing. And so I know when somebody has an issue around that, they can go to him for it. This other part sounds good, but that's where value is added, and that's how people know when to go to you for those respective things. Yeah. And you have to identify that.
No, and you're absolutely right, and this is a problem I have encountered myself, right? I am definitely, from the beginning, I've always been like, I want to uplift Miami locals, right? I love the change. I love that new companies are moving out here. I love that job opportunities are being created. But even from a previous educator background, I know that if we don't educate our high school students, if we don't educate even those that are graduated from colleges about tech and everything that's coming, they're not going to know, right?
Yep.
And I think I have done a good job placing myself in with and aligning myself with companies like that.
Yep.
But I am encountering the issue where it's like, cool, I have people in the room, but what else? What other resources can I give them? And it's not necessarily because they don't exist, but I feel like it's like we're not all talking to one another. So, and this is more from a company perspective, right? If there's an organizations out there and companies out there, and I don't even want to say just tech, right? But just companies that can really move the needle in one way or another, and they're not necessarily communicating. What's the best advice we can give them of how to make this happen for us?
So, let me make sure that I'm clear, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, there are two organizations, and they both operate in the realm of, let's use the example you use, education for students, right? And let's say that it's students, let's say high school students, right? And maybe there's two facets to that, both exposing them to career paths that they may have, and then one other one is educating and preparing them for those prospective career paths. And one does this really well, and the other one does that other thing really well. And then the question might be, how can they properly communicate with each other in order to move this thing even to an even higher level? Maybe they only work with a few schools.
Right.
And they're like, oh, actually, I want to work with the schools you have. And like, oh, maybe I can work with the schools you have. But they don't talk about that, and they don't know that.
Right, or they might not even know that each other might exist. Or one of them exists.
Yeah.
Or they're just not in communications, and it's not because they might not even want to, right?
Right.
It's just we all have busy lives and jobs and
yes,
missions to fulfill.
Yes.
So the question is, how, one, can we make it, or what advice could we have in order for them to even know that each other exists? To how do we move that needle forward?
Right. I think sometimes people jump to the idea of, you know what I need to do? I need to make a platform, and this platform is going to connect them in this marketplace type of thing. I get that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to stop anybody from wanting to execute on that particular idea, because in some instances, in some industries, it makes a lot of sense. But what I would argue is it would be better, and to even test concept, to have them come to places physically and just say, I want to have a conversation with everybody in this industry lane, right? Because the thing is not the communication part, it's the trust part. You don't build up trust appropriately just by saying, you do this, I do this, we should do this thing. You build up trust by saying, okay, I've met with you a couple times. I understand what you're trying to do. I think what you do is amazing. And I think there are ways that we can add to one another in this respect, right? Either whether that's a joint partnership or whether that's an actual coming together as an organization into one organization, or whether that's just doing a quick project together in order to prove a concept for something, or whether that's just sharing, communication across the board to say, I'm going to communicate with my audience about what you do, and you communicate with your audience about what I do, and we'll share each other. Or I have a client that I work with very, very closely, and you have a client that you work with very, very closely, but we think we should probably be talking to one another across those lines, right? Or I can enhance services that you have, like different ways to go about approaching that. And the only way that happens is if the people meet. And so that's not always to say, let's do a social around blank. It's not necessarily that, but it is to say you need to give them, rails in order to meet. You need to give them a format or a guide in order to come in and meet each other on terms where they can understand, this is why I'm here to meet with these respective people in this industry. So if it is education, I would say, okay, you could just do an education social. That would be the easiest thing to do. But how do you take it a step beyond that, right? So there are a lot of things to talk about in education. Things that are going right, things that are not going so right, things that could change, things that we can improve upon, things that are working as active projects, things that were abandoned just simply because people turned over, because things are changing with time. What are the things that you can have a conversation about in that space that can galvanize these people to want to do those respective projects? Or to have them talk about their projects and then, I need to talk to that person. This person is actually doing a really amazing work, and I think I have something to add to that. But you have to create an environment that's going to incentivize them to share those respective things, right? And it isn't just a social. It can be. It could be a thing wrapped around, with a social wrapped around a thing, but it needs to be something very intentional that is helping people to come together in a way that's very direct.
Well, I guess that's why Lunch and Learn is also happening, right? This one is a little bit different as well, because we are at least incentivizing or asking local businesses to also come in and give, hear them out.
Exactly.
Give their own opinion.
Exactly.
Well.
And so the thing to take it, you're bringing in particular people. And we're having a meta conversation about this now, but you're bringing people into the space in order to have a conversation with someone that has been identified as being, a value add to the group. Then the next step beyond that is to say, now, not only that, but how can we make sure that in the moment, people are sharing information with each other while they're there, that they can help take away stuff. Because the worst problem that I'll tell you from all these respective social things is follow-up.
Yes.
People don't follow up appropriately. And that is for a myriad of reasons. Maybe they're bad at it. Maybe they're good at it, but then they just don't have time. Maybe they just forgot. Like a bunch of things that can happen around follow-up. Maybe they just don't have the time to actually schedule the way that they would like to. Myriad of things. And I'm guilty of those things as well. I'm not above that. So the thing about it is how can we incentivize somebody to say, I need to make sure that I do this follow-up. I need to make sure that I'm connecting with this person appropriately. How can I make sure that I'm moving the needle forward to make this relationship bloom into something new, a business opportunity, a value-add situation, something that can help what I'm doing and what that other person's doing.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I preach about following up every Tech Tuesdays. I'm like,
Yeah.
we only create a space, but if you're not following up, if you're not making those connections, like, there's only so far as you can go.
100%.
So
100%.
okay. The wheels are spinning about new initiatives for me, but
Okay.
anyways, that's besides the point. That's not why we're here.
Yeah.
I did earlier. You mentioned you don't like hearing Miami being called as Silicon Valley, and I completely agree with you on that.
Yes.
I have a whole spiel somewhere about it, but but I wanted to know, like, why is that? Where is that mindset coming from?
Two big things. Thing number one is why. I think sometimes people think in order to validate what you're doing, you need to make a clear comparison. And Silicon Valley is working in different respects, and will continue to work for completely different reasons than what Miami is going to work and what's going to work for Miami. Even if we were to, one, which gets into the second issue about scale, even if we were to scale, and normally when people make the comparison between us and SF, it's about overall VC investment. So the billions of dollars that go into our respective ecosystems in any given year. People will make that comparison and will look at whether or not we are on track for that. Now, one thing people do is look at growth. They'll say, oh, the percentage growth year over year for Miami is X, right? But I don't even like playing those games because that's a weird conversation to have, because the decade in which that growth was happening is completely different than the decade in which this growth is happening.
And ours is happening faster.
Correct. So, like, how do you, there are ways to do it, but it's a dicey game to play, especially when we're talking about numbers.
Yeah.
In context. So one thing that I like to do is say, hey, SF is SF. We don't want to be Silicon Beach. We don't want to be a copy of that. There are contextual things. There are community things. There are specific business things and industry things that are going to work there that are not going to work here. So continually making the comparison is completely kind of missing the plot. It's missing the point of why Miami is actually going to become, and is currently right now, an international global business hub in its own right.
Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about the scaling portion of it, first we really got to have a conversation about our peers. We have a lot of peer cities that we still don't outrank them in a lot of very key aspects that once we fix and improve upon, we'll actually be very, 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 very much, well, I shouldn't say very, very, much more competitive than we currently are.
Yeah.
So, like, if our one that we go to when people should actually look to first before we start looking at SF is Austin, right? In a lot of different ways, we are very, very, very comparable to Austin for the fact that we're both down south. The weather is an attractive. Taxes is an attractive thing. Government and how those governments treat businesses are not too dissimilar from one another. And real estate has a huge role to play in both of these economies for different reasons, completely different reasons, but definitely something to think about. And when you talk about our tech ecosystems, there are a lot of pluses in Austin that are somewhat similar, if not completely dissimilar to Miami. And so we should be looking at a peer city to understand what things we could potentially improve upon. Like, for instance, people say that talent in Austin is better than in Miami, right? I'd argue that's a little outlandish. That's a little outlandish to say. But the reason why people say that is because they have a clear pipeline that they can look to, which is the University of Texas Austin, right? But we have universities down here that do an amazing job as well. It's the perception that's the difference, right? And so we're playing games, we're having conversations around Silicon Valley, when in reality, we should be talking about Austin, Philadelphia, we should be talking about the Carolinas, and we should be having a conversation about DC. Like, that's where we should start.
Yeah.
If you don't have a conversation about those cities first, I genuinely feel like you're missing a step in terms of where we're at, right? We are constantly in and out of the top 10 in any given year for our overall VC dollars raised in billions of dollars. And that's going to continue to happen in different respects, given that we're starting to round out a bit on the curve and how fast we are growing, right? depending on like what month you look at or what quarter you look at, I should say, because we should look at it quarter by quarter, not month by month, because people get a little outlandish with that too. We have higher growth rates than a lot of these other respective cities, but there's always room to grow and change. And in order to keep that rate, there's a lot of things that we need to do in different respects. So that's kind of where that comes from.
Yeah.
It's not to say that we're not comparable at all. That's not the conversation, but we shouldn't be making that comparison because it just has a conversation that we shouldn't really be having. We should be having a completely different conversation than what that phrase elicits normally.
No, and I'm glad you brought it that point. I'm glad you brought the point of that we should be comparing ourselves to Austin or DC, and that's more likely of our skillhood, because a lot of people the same way, they just say, well, you're not Silicon Valley yet. I always like to say it's not when we will be, it's what will Miami be.
Correct. Yeah. And we have to have a conversation about what does it look like when you get to, like, let's not even say their number, twice the amount of investment than we currently have right now. Yeah. We're just still not even close, right? So once you get to twice the amount, what does the ecosystem look like, right? Does it have more VCs that invest internally here? Just because they're placed here doesn't mean they invest here. Yeah. Does it mean that the talent has grown past the 2 or 3% that it currently is at in tech talent to double the number that it is now or triple the number that it is now? What does that look like? Yeah. Does it mean that the amount of founders who are currently investing or currently getting invested in or are currently operating at a revenue positive is double or triple the number now? What does that look like? Right? So you got to answer some internal questions first. Got to go deeper than that before we start, jumping directly to SF or New York in that respect. But we're comparable in different ways. Our local economy, our real estate markets, those things are conversations to have, right? Yeah. But tech ecosystem specific stuff, that's a different conversation. We have to do a better job of having that in conversation. So when people make the comparison as far as local economies, sure, we can have that conversation. But even then, we still need to qualify certain statements. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times, like, it's kind of overlooked the time span of it, right? Like, we're still developing systems, we're still young, and I think a lot of people move out down here and they just expect everything to just happen overnight.
We need a lot of infrastructure to be placed into the ecosystem. And infrastructure, I specifically mean institutions and actual hard infrastructure to make people have, a good quality of life that will continue to increase as they stay here.
Absolutely. And I think even with technical talent, I was at Hack Week this year and I saw hackers that were from Miami. Yeah. And they're like, this is my first hack week. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, we didn't know that there was, that there was a community for us. They're now finding out about it. And I'm like, well, that's amazing that you're here. That is amazing, and me doing my marketing thing. I'm like, okay, well, look, follow this publication. Yeah. Just to make sure that they stay there, because now it's like, it's not that it doesn't exist here. Mm-hmm. It's just that I feel word is like, I don't want to say finally. I don't want to use that word, but it's like, word is getting out.
Yeah, I think about it more like this. 10 years ago, when I was serving drinks and stuff like that, all that time ago, it wasn't that the ecosystem wasn't here. And to be completely frank, and to be clear with everybody, there wasn't an ecosystem even 10 years before that, before I even came. Yeah. I would say even further back than that. When people talk about the first PC, which is up north, being created, the thing that was persistent in the last couple of decades was that there were entrepreneurs here and there were technologists here. There just was no joint community engagement piece that let people know that those things existed, right? There were plenty of great companies, right? Like Magic Leap has been here for a very long time. Yeah. And even before that, there were huge tech companies that were down here. I know Alienware in particular comes to mind. But these companies had very insular types of tech talent that were in them. And so you weren't seeing them, all over the place and in the way that we think about a tech ecosystem now. It's completely different. Yeah. And so when I got here, having there be tech talent and people and entrepreneurs that were already here in the tech ecosystem, that was just the start of breaking down of what we used to call them silos of those respective areas. And I would say those barriers didn't even completely break down until the pandemic happened, which forced a lot of these conversations to completely change. Because I can tell you, most of the time when I was interacting with people before the pandemic, it was through meetup.com and like other little small groups that were very, all the data scientists are over here and the product developers are over here and the product designers are over here. Like I went to all of those respective clubs and groups and they never talked to each other, ever. They just did their own thing. Only a couple of organizations were bringing them together for entrepreneurs because they know entrepreneurs needed that support and assistance. But at the time, all of those groups were completely separate from one another. I was going all across town to go to those respective things. I remember going all the way to Weston to go to UKG when they were doing their UX meetups. And then I remember, I would go downtown in order to go to Venture Hive. And then I remember going up north back again in order to meet people from South Florida Tech Hubs and their respective groups that they were fostering. So like that, all of that was very, you know, separated. Now, pandemic happened. People are like, Miami, and they want to socialize, and all this stuff started being, hyper concentrated, in respective places. And so what you'll see as time goes on is that we're going to find ways to even do that better across all of South Florida. Right now, we're doing a really good job in Miami with that, but like, people in Fort Lauderdale are not going to just wait for things to happen. They're going to start building things, and they have. They've started already. I saw some things a couple weeks ago where I'm like, that's a really good sign. Like, we'll start seeing some more people move back and forth between both of these. Same thing up in Boca, too. You'll start seeing South Florida be activated more broadly because we have to do that. Because if we don't do that, then we'll never be able to grow even have a conversation about what we were talking about a second ago, which is this SF New York conversation in full, right? As an economy, yes. As a tech ecosystem, no. So we have to continue to engage the entire South Florida in order to do that more broadly. Yeah.
Thank you. So I do have two final questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, clearly there's a lot that needs to be done and we've come a long way. So if you can send a message or give a message to both founders, investors, and the companies that are helping drive this ecosystem, what would be like your one? It doesn't have to be an all-encompassing message, but what would that message be?
That's a lot. Let's see. I would say, I think the biggest thing I want everyone to, if I could give a message, is that we have to think long-term. And it doesn't have to be, what does Miami look like 20 years from now? It doesn't have to be that long. That is real long-term planning, but let's talk about 5 years. It should be 10, but let's just talk about 5. Starting with 5 years from now, what are the things that we know we need to fix? Otherwise, we will have fallen behind what we believe Miami will be in 5 years, right? So we always talk about very simple, the same things. Talent, access to capital over and over again, and then also trying to establish industries in Miami. Those 3 things are the most common things that I talk about with everybody all of the time. I talk about it several times a week in many different fashions, and everybody has an issue with one of those things in any given conversation when they're talking about stuff that needs to be improved. And we made a lot of strides. We've made a lot of improvement in each one of those areas. But now, if I have to give a message, is pick one and lean into it super duper hard. If you care about industries growing in Miami, choose an industry and lean in it extremely hard, right? An industry is a very broad thing to say, right? Because industry is a factor of how much talent is here and how many startups are going here, which goes back into the other two. But at least do it from the lens of that, because that helps a lot with helping to establish Miami as a place that people can see this thing as, right? You can't say that Miami is the number one place for, and I won't even pick an industry, quantum. Let's just say that we wanted quantum to be a thing in Miami, right?
That is a big one.
It's a big one.
I tried doing quantum computing marketing. Oof.
Yeah. I don't know why you did that, but we'll leave that for another time. That in particular, if somebody said, "Oh, we really want Miami to be a place for quantum," what are the core components you need to make sure that that's happening? Like, I'll tell you, just because I went to a whole bunch of conferences, scientists just is a start, just a simple start. How many scientists in Miami are actually focusing on this issue? And I will tell you, if that's something that people care about, nowhere near enough, like not even close to being enough. So how do you get more of them to come down here? And that's what you should focus on, right? So if that's industry, focus on that. If it's capital, right, then some people will say, oh, it's because there's not enough founders down here that have good companies. And then another person will say it's not enough investors down here that focus. I'm like, okay, if you see that as the issue, there's a clear way to fix that particular issue. And it's connecting the founders that are ready at the time that the investors are ready to hear them, right? Which technically is all the time. So how do we do that better? And if that's the issue that you want to focus on, lean into that. Really, 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 really hard, extremely hard. And then last is on talent. Like, if talent is what you care about, then we have to be more creative about getting our talent into the places where they need to be. And there's two things. There is the upskilling component and the reskilling component, right? How do we make sure that people who are in the industry or in the lane or in the position that they're supposed to be are qualified and have the skill sets that they need in order to meet whatever that employer is looking for? And how do we help employers understand that what they're asking and what they're looking for is appropriate based on what they're asking the person to do based on the position? It's both, right, that are necessary. And there are plenty, look, and I said those three things. There are people doing things in every single one of those lanes, right? With talent, Miami Tech Works is doing a lot in that respect. People need to have conversations about how do we close that gap and have those conversations, but they're talking with the employers about that. In terms of entrepreneurship, like a lot, and I can name like 10 of them, but like, and I won't go through all of them, but there are a lot of companies that are saying like, look, the founders are here. Like, what Techstars has put out, what Endeavor has put out, what we're trying to do with Built in Miami program, like, we're trying to make sure that the earlier stage companies are getting forward-facing visibility to investors that are here in Miami specifically. And then lastly, when we're talking about industries, pick one and then stick with it. And there are plenty of companies and clubs that are focusing on that. And like, people have heard me and they kind of gave me slack for it, but I tell people, I'm like, AI is not an industry. I'm like, it's not, it's a technology stack. It's not an actual like industry in and of itself. It's not.
It's a rapper.
It's just, AI is going, if AI is ubiquitous and is going to be in everything, that by definition makes it not an industry. So then what are we using AI for? And what industries do we think AI is going to be most impactful in Miami? Just is that straightforward, right? It's not super easy to do, but it is a very straightforward problem to solve. So if I believe in AI, then I say I believe in AI, and I want AI to be used for medical or health tech. I want it to be used for real estate and prop tech, or I want it to be used for fintech, right? I say what industries I want AI to be leveraged and used for. Because if I just believe in AI as a general concept, unless I am an AI scientist, researcher, data scientist, that person that actually works on the actual models that I'm building, then I'm not really having a frank conversation with you about AI. Because I don't make the actual technology that builds up the models and actually changes how people ingest and train data. I'm actually talking about the layer on top of that. And if I'm talking about a layer on top of it, I need to give an industry. Otherwise, I'm not talking about anything. Like, we have to be very, very clear on that. And I harp on that point because I don't want, which is what everybody's fear is when they come in, that they're not taking Miami seriously. And that's a perception issue. In order to be taken seriously, we need to be specific about what we want to do. Don't try to be everything for everybody. Right? And Miami's not going to be just one thing, but we do have to choose some things. And even if we choose wrong, that's okay. Because we won't all choose wrong. It's a community. That's the whole point of having a community. We won't all choose everything wrong. We will just make bets. That's this whole game. We're making bets on what we think is going to be the path forward. And we have to be confident in that bet and move forward on it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And the next question is, so I want it's honestly for the people that were you when you a couple years ago, right? Or are you right now, in the sense that they come from a non-technical background and they want to get into tech. They know it's probably the best move at the moment with how fast it's moving. And you mentioned consistency, right? But other than consistency, what advice would you give that person?
One, stop saying you're from a non-technical background. Like, you know what happens when you were from a non-technical background and you're in tech now? It becomes completely irrelevant, right? Yeah. The only reason to talk about whether you're from or not from a non-technical background is to make yourself feel comfortable in a conversation so that you can let people know I don't know everything about tech. That's the only reason why we'd even preface that as a phrase. So moving forward, I want you, I don't even know what camera, is this the camera? This is the camera. I want you as an individual to think about, what is it that I'm hoping to accomplish with technology? If it's to get a job, great. You're not gonna know anything about technology when you start off. You're gonna think that developers do everything, and they don't, because they're developers, software developers to be specific, are different from product designers, which are different from QA analysts, which are different from data analysts, which are different from product managers. You're not gonna know any of the stuff that I might have just said, but the goal is to take a beat on the weekends when you have time, because you probably have a job right now, and to learn these respective things. Go to YouTube University. I'm a big advocate of that. And you start looking at these respective videos and you start learning what these different areas are. And you type in very silly questions like, what does a data scientist do? Or what does a product manager look into? Or what is their job like? What is their day like? Type those respective questions in. Then when you do your own research by yourself, you start going to stuff. She said you already talked about it. I'm gonna talk about it again, because you gotta keep going to things over and over and over again, and telling people what you want and saying different things. So I remember, and I'll give you an example. I was coming from the law school and I wanted to learn more about data analysis and data science, but I didn't really know the difference between the two things. I was like, does data analysts do the same thing that data scientists do? Do data scientists do something with hypothesis testing that I think regular scientists do? Because I know that that's a huge component part of scientists. Yeah. I need to ask this question to somebody. So I asked a bunch of people, I'm like, what are the differences between these two things? And one, really quickly, I found out a lot of people don't know the answer to that question. But the other part is that when I actually met a real data scientist, they helped me understand what the path looked like. And that's what you have to be cultivating. You cultivate a relationship by having a frank conversation with someone and saying like, look, I know you know a little bit, even a little bit. Maybe they just started. They're a freshman and they're like, I just started this path. Don't rely on me on everything. I just started learning this thing. But even a little bit to help you on your journey, to let you know what you like, is important.
How do you overcome that though, from someone that, because I think we both have had enough conversations with people that they're scared, right? Or they might not want to look dumb. For me, when I was learning security tokens, I was scared to ask questions, and I had someone that was open and willing enough to sit down with me until 5 p.m. Every single day to teach me the world of it.
I think everybody thinks I started on stages. I think everybody thinks like, Eric, you were born on a stage, and so you talk all the time, you feel comfortable with everybody. That's like the opposite. I very, very much get my energy alone. I'm like, how I recharge myself, I do that in a very introverted type of way. I just learned over time that what I needed to do if I really wanted to accomplish this thing is I had to take a little bit of chance. And here's the biggest part. You don't have to take a chance every single time you walk out the door. You just have to take a chance like once a week. Maybe once a month. If you're really scared, if like, you just say you're just an inherently scary person. You're just like, I cannot get over the anxiety of asking someone this really important question. So what you need to do to start with, I'm talking to you again. What you need to do to start with is to start with, I'm gonna go in one time this month. I don't know what time, but I'm gonna pick a date. I'm gonna go to an event. And I'm just going to talk to somebody, and I'm not going to talk to the most important person there. I'm not even going to talk to the headliner person. I'm going to go and talk to somebody who looks probably just as scared as I do, and I'm just going to ask them why they're there, right? And you start with small stuff like that. If you even have to start that far back. But let's say you just have to start really far back, you need to start with your peers. Because everybody thinks, I need to go and talk to the most important person in the room, right? And I never took that approach. I always just started off with my peers. And then as I got more comfortable with my peers, it became a lot easier when I was having a good conversation to then pivot real small, especially in a very crowded room, to another circle and then just continue a conversation. Like, I think people think that going into networking events is you constantly interrupting people in their conversations, and that's not how networking works at all. That might be some of it, but I personally don't like that. That's never an approach that I took. Even to this day, when it happened yesterday, I was like, I don't like this. I don't like that somebody's coming into my conversation while I'm having this conversation. Yeah. So what you do is you don't do that. You go to the person who's just standing there twiddling their thumbs, or if you're an adult, when you're in a bar-like setting, somebody's always waiting to like talk to the bartender for something. Just strike up a very, very simple conversation. You have to practice. Yeah. It's practice. If you never get out of your comfort zone, it's because you just haven't practiced enough. Literally. I'm not here on this podcast just like doing it amazingly and everything like that because I did it. This is my first time. This is like the 100th of one that I've ever done. It's because I continue to practice over and over and over again. And it makes me feel more comfortable for the next time. And I already know because I'm a self-conscious person too. So did I make errors and stuff? I'm already thinking about that now. And the conversation's not even over yet. Yeah. But I still show up and make sure that as I'm having these conversations and I'm doing these respective things, that people know that I not only care about what I'm having a conversation about, but that I genuinely want to help this person. Or I genuinely, not even help the person, because it's not always about helping people, is I genuinely am coming from a place where I want to know more. I want to learn. I just want to learn. I want to learn everything that I possibly can. I want to be the best version of myself that I can ever be. That's what I genuinely want for my life. And so because I really, 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 really want that, I genuinely want other people to find that too. And so it comes out when I'm having a conversation. Like, oh yeah, I vibe with that too. I'm like, now I feel comfortable because this person like is giving me validation that what I'm saying is making sense. And it's not for you to go and, you know, have the most important conversation of your life every single time you walk into a room. It's for you to have a conversation and build a relationship.
Absolutely. And I think you're so right about that. I think recently, like mostly I have seen you I always see you at work settings. And I think a couple months back, we just had a regular conversation that had nothing to do with work.
Yeah. And
it was, but I also think it's because, you know, at least I felt comfortable enough where it's like, oh, I don't have to say anything else about work. I'm like, hey, what's up? How's life going? So you're right. Maybe sometimes just even focusing on like hobbies or bringing up topics that are not necessarily related. Because
you know what I don't want to talk about when I'm in, because like we're talking about a work session, but work for me is going to a social. Yeah. I was like, that's work. So when we're having a conversation at a social, I don't want to have a more super in-depth conversation about somebody's pitch deck. Yeah. I don't want to do that. And people do that all the time to me. Yeah. What I want is for you to establish a relationship with me. Then when I have a relationship with you, you say, Eric, I would love to follow up with you on this respective thing. I try to be as open and available as I can. If we have a good conversation, I'm going to be like, I'll give you 30 minutes. Of course. If you say 10 minutes, even better. That's super simple for me. I could squeeze that in. Yeah. Like, that is establishing a relationship. And that doesn't require you to come in heavy-handed with whatever it is that you're doing. You can have a conversation about nothing that has to do with work and then finish and say, I would love to follow with you to talk with you about XYZ thing. And I'm probably going to say yes because I had a good conversation with you, right? Yeah. Like nobody has ever like pitched something at me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to drop everything I'm doing right now to understand what this thing is about because I have to do that. Yeah. That's never been me. But you know what I will do? I will follow up with somebody, or I will be open to somebody following up with me if we had a good conversation about like the Inter Miami game that I went to because I went to it for the first time and I thought it was amazing and I love going to it. I can't say that would have done it, but it does. It just regular conversation. It just does it. You got to do that.
Okay, so more on the personal note. What's next for Erick Gavin?
I don't know. I know that I want to continue to do this community work. And I want to continue to impact what has been happening in Miami in whatever way that I can. And I know that whatever is next, I will always be supportive of this community and help in any way that I can. Outside of that, everybody's going to have to see.
Okay,
Yes.
fair enough. So there you guys have it, folks. This was our podcast. I don't even know which camera to look for. With Erick Gavin. Whoops. With Erick Gavin here held at Office Logic. We are having a Lunch and Learn series with himself on June 12th, 11 a.m. right here at the Hub. You can come and ask your questions and get to know more about himself and the ecosystem.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.